Hello, Noble people. My name is Noble, and this is going to be kind of a sequel to the crack theories video. I also do want to give a big thank you to everyone who watched that. That is by far my most viewed video, my most liked video, and most commented video, and I want to thank you for all the support. But this time around, I decided that I kind of wanted to do a little bit different. Instead of talking about some more crack theories, because there really isn't too many really big crack theories that aren't insanely long, I mainly talked about the main ones last video. So this one I decided I'm just going to talk about some of my personal favorite theories that I think actually have a decent amount of merit to the overall story of Deltarune itself. Unlike the other three theories we talked about in the crack theories video, these theories actually have, I think, somewhat more of a formulated like structure to them. With like the Azrael dust and Oberon smog, you kind of had to do a couple big leaps in logic, which yes, you can do leaps in logic with theories, but they have to be somewhat reasonable. The idea that Rouse is dead, or taking very big leaps where the game really hasn't confirmed anything, isn't really good formulation for a good theory. So I really like that these theories actually formulate and provide evidence and even provide counterpoints. So without further ado, let's hop into the first theory in this video. The first theory in this video is going to be the everybody bleeds theory. One of my personal favorite theories that has actually been here since chapter 1. It's been interpreted upon multiple times, and the main idea of this theory is kind of talking about how the monsters in Deltarune are different than the monsters in Undertale, mainly because of the line Suzie says, where she says, "Everybody bleeds, right?" Now, this alone would not be enough to make a theory on. That's why I like this theory. There's a lot more like evidence instead of just doing leaps in logic. But Suzie says stuff about blood so much in Deltarune, not even in just chapter 1, in chapter 2, and she's probably going to say stuff in chapter 3. Now, obviously, this either means she's like watched stuff, maybe like a horror movie with blood, or she bleeds herself. And this is kind of even supported by a scrapped asset sheet of Suzie's down sprite or her hurt sprite, where she is actually bleeding in the sprites. Now, this is scrapped, but it does mean that there was at least somewhat of a concept to have monsters in this universe bleed at one point. Now, the reason why this is a big deal is because it's drilled into our head in Undertale that monsters can't bleed and are made of magic. That's literally one of the key plot points of the True Pacifist route with the amalgams. Their magic is falling apart because of the termination, and they start to meld together. They're all made of magic, and when you kill a monster, they turn to dust. The only monsters that are different are the boss monsters, which are only Asgore and Toriel, where when they die, their soul can actually persist outside of their body for a little bit before it breaks. Now, this obviously means that, well, if we're to believe what Suzie said is real, then Deltarune monsters are fundamentally different than the Undertale ones. And this is even more key to point out the fact that Sans actually does bleed in Undertale. Now, you can treat this as, oh, well, that means some monsters can bleed, or you can treat this as the fact that Sans Undertale is Sans Deltarune, and we do have hints for that. As a matter of fact, that is a different theory that I'm not going to cover in this video because it's pretty big to go over that theory. But the fact that this theory can kind of be tied into the other fact to give it more credibility is really interesting. There is some little different tidbits of more information. The fact that Birdly doesn't turn to dust when you kill him with a snow grave means that he probably is dead, but their bodies still persist. However, there are two contradicting points to this overall theory, that being two actual messages where if you talk to a kid, they ask, does it feel weird to be made out of blood? And obviously the fact that it seems that in the graveyard, they put objects to represent the people who are dead, and seeming that as they're only monsters dead, this means that they wouldn't have any bodies to put in, so they would only be able to put in objects in the ground. So that does kind of break the theory a little bit, but the fact that there's so much other evidence, including scrapped content, I really like this theory, and I think it has some merit in the overall story of Deltarune itself. The next theory I want to talk about is the tea theory. Now this theory is a little interesting because it's kind of talking about the item, and it's only just like one little snippet of a little bit of a clue that is kind of obvious. Basically, the tea item in chapter 2, you have Chris, Suzie, Rousey, and Noelle tea, and you can give it to those respective characters, and they'll have reactions based off of which tea you have. The best example is if you give Noelle Suzie tea, she gets 400 HP, which is literally 4 times her maximum health, and it's just supposed to be like, oh, I really like Suzie. Obviously, that's the whole point of chapter 2, but it also allows us to have some insight on how other characters feel about each other, and it's a lot different than you would think. Two of the biggest ones is the fact that when Chris and Noelle drink their respective teas, they seem to just kind of have a meh taste to it, with Suzie and Rousey even quoting that Chris is just kind of casually drinking it, that it doesn't look like they really like it or they don't dislike it, with Noelle saying it tastes like cinnamon, but it also has a bad aftertaste, which kind of encapsulates their entire relationship in chapter 2. There's even a part where you talk to one of the Addisons. Well, Noelle said it's kind of hard to describe Chris as a friend because they've been kind of neighbors and kind of casual friends, but she really doesn't know what to call Chris anymore because they've kind of had a little bit of a following out and not really talked to each other for some time, so it's really hard to call them friends, which is a good way to describe the tea. However, one of the biggest things with this actual tea is the fact it gives the impression that either Chris has a somewhat of a crush on Suzie or really likes Suzie, and that really doesn't like Rousey. Now, with the Suzie one, it's kind of left to be somewhat ambiguous because Suzie and Rousey both do heal 120 from the respective teas, but the fact that it seems like Chris was like staring at Suzie and Rousey they seem into it seems a little weird, but this just might be a little bit of a side gag. However, the biggest thing is that even more so, they have kind of a completely monotone reaction when they drink Rousey tea. They even heal 10% less than they do Noelle tea, so maybe they have a complicated relationship with Noelle, but they still care for her in some way, while they kind of have like no feelings at all to Rousey. Now, obviously, this is very, very interesting, especially since, obviously, Rousey has been there since the beginning, and Suzie seems to like Rousey plenty. I mean, she literally says, come on, Rousey, and takes him on an adventure in chapter 2 that we don't see. So the fact that Chris is kind of neutral or maybe kind of negative towards Rousey is interesting. Now, this could be the fact that inconspicuously or randomly Rousey looks like Chris's brother, which might be a little weird and might still dwell on Chris as a character, but I feel like it might have some stuff leading into the fact that Rousey is trying to talk to Chris without the player and our input. This has happened in chapter 1, in chapter 2. In chapter 2, you actually do have a choice to have Rousey talk to you. If in chapter 1 you don't get a choice, you instantly go to the POV of Suzie fighting Lancer. So it's kind of interesting that even though Rousey is kind of still trying to talk to Chris themselves doesn't really care too much for Rousey. Now, this theory really isn't like as big as the everybody bleeds theory. It doesn't have as much impact, but just interesting to note some of the character dynamics, at least in chapter 2. It is also good to note that Toby said on his Blue Sky that in chapter 3, if you had any teas left over in your inventory, they turn to rotten tea. Now, this could be just a random thing because obviously character dynamics are going to change, but also it might become some of an overpowered thing. If Noelle were ever be an actual main character, it would be a little overpowered for you to just keep having a bunch of Suzie's tea in your inventory and be able to heal her 400 HP, which makes sense. The next theory I want to talk about is probably the most divisive theory of these three and the last one of our video, the one ending theory. Now, this is not really necessary as a theory, as I'm pretty sure this is probably confirmed, but a lot of people don't want to believe it. If you go into the Steam webpage, it showcases that Deltarune has only one ending with a question mark. And a lot of people think this is, oh, there's only going to be one true ending, which I don't really think that's the case, because I would like to think that the pacifist ending and Undertale was the true ending. But if it means only one ending, yet we still have the weird or Snowgrave route, what does this necessarily mean for the overall game if there's going to be more than one or only one? How will this play out? And the one ending theory is the fact that there's only going to be one ending, but there's going to be different ways to get to the same result. Now, this doesn't really have like anything that I can like show on the screen. I'll show some stuff when I can, but there really isn't too much like actual evidence. It's literally just going based off of that, and I know I did say I like this stuff because of evidence, but the fact that Toby literally says it in the store page makes me feel like it has some merit. And we do know that we have the Snowgrave or the weird route, but I feel like that's the reason why it is a route. We can have a different route. If you're driving to go to a destination, you can go multiple routes, but each route is going to take you the same way. There's also this theory, I think it's a study, that if you are born the exact moment a bomb or device activates, within 50 years the world will explode. So even though you're born the exact day that activates, whatever happens, once you turn 50, the bomb will explode and the entire world will end. You can't do anything to change it. You can live your life differently. You could be someone who's an amazing person, be like a superhero. You could be an evil dictator. It doesn't matter what you could be. The fact of it is after those 50 years, you're always going to end up with the Earth exploded. So that is the case with Deltarune. We could try and change anything we want, but at the end, the ending is going to be different. The journey might have been different. We might end up defeating the Titans, defeating the Roaring, the Angel, whatever, but it could turn out that we were a horrible person on the way. We manipulated, killed multiple of our friends, but it's still technically the same quote-unquote ending. And now, yes, this doesn't really have too much evidence to support it, but this is one that I really think would be really interesting. The fact that while our actions don't have consequences like they do in Undertale, it still means that this entire journey can have a different amount of value. With the normal route, the journey feels fantastical, goofy, funny, like spectacular, but if you're going down a weird and dark route, it feels empty and shallow. We have the same result, but none of the satisfaction. And I feel like that's a very interesting way to develop a game, and I really like this theory. Now, that being said, this is going to be all for this video. I had a lot of fun making it. These are definitely some of my favorite theories. I'll give an honorable mention to some of the night theories. I like the Papyrus Night theory and the Alvin Night theory, and I'll also give a shout out to my own personal theory, just because I'm happy that I was able to make a theory that I really haven't seen too many people talk about, but it felt kind of self-absorbent to have a full thing just talking about my theory over again. That's really repetitive and stupid. But yeah, hope you all enjoyed this video. Stay noble. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.